Thank you, Oliver. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so basically, as Oliver said, a human task um, is to handle a human interaction with a workflow. Your workflow will wait on the task to be claimed, and once it's claimed, to be completed. A typical example that comes to mind when I say this is an approval process, where after a series of steps or where you gather data, massage information, go through different pipelines, with the result, you get someone that has to approve that result, right? So a human task is constructed by a template, which is basically a form, which you can build with a form builder. It has an assignment policy, which is basically an array of users, which can be assigned to a task. Only one user can hold the task at once, but each user has an expiration time in minutes, right? So this is handy when, for example, say you want to approve some holidays, maybe you make a process for holidays, and the guy who has to approve your holidays has gone, then it just moves to the second one. You build your logic with that. So maybe the manager of that manager gets to approve your holidays or something like that. Once that array of user everybody is expired, you can choose to leave the task open or terminate the task, right? It also has a trigger policy. The trigger policy is so the human task is just a state machine in and out of itself. It has different states. So for example, the task is unclaimed and you claimed the task. So that the task is changed from to in progress. And if the task is completed, it's either completed or failed or whatever. The trigger policy allows you to attach a hook or start a workflow per se if this state change is triggered. And you have input parameters, which like any other task in Conductor, but these input parameters are going to be the input for the template. So that's the way you handle a human task. Okay, I'm going to show you in Conductor itself. So basically, this is the user form. This is the form builder. You have a list of supported components. Well, are the ones we currently support. And a canvas where you get to build the form. When you drag the component, you configure the component. Depending on the component, you'll get different options. For example, this is a text field, so I can have it multi-line. If it was a number field, it can be decimal. If it's a choice, then I get to pick the choices I can put here, right? And the field name is what I've said before. So the field name is mapped to the input parameter of the task. So here, if I say my options, then whatever I put in the task in the human task for my options is the input of this. You can choose to test your form by clicking preview, and this is how it's going to be rendered for the user. As everything in Conductor, you have the ability to go to the code, which is just a JSON. And you can see here that the form itself is just a JSON schema, which is a common structure, and a template UI. The JSON schema is what we use for validations. So for example, if you try to submit an option for my option that it's option 4, you'll get rejected. You'll get rejected by the front end if you choose to do it as a developer. You force this to be done this way, or you will get rejected by the backend. So you get both validations. So if he tries to jump the front end, he will still get rejected by the backend. The template UI is what we use to render the specific component. This is powered by JSON Forms, which is an open source library, which allows you to render JSON schemas and template UIs, right? As this is as for the form builder. As for the human task, as the same way you can search for workflows or scheduler, you can search for human tasks. Basically, here you have the typical inputs of the task itself. And something really cool is you can search by the input data. And this will come in handy. For example, here I did a checkout ID and associate it to a field. If I search, I get the tasks that were completed for this particular input data. When you have a task, you can choose to claim the task. If I'm the owner of the task, I can just claim it. But if I'm an admin of the task, I can override my claim. So if I try to claim a task that it's not for me, I'm not the admin, I will get an error and I can override the claim because I'm admin. I can skip. Skip means I can, so the array of users you get to define in the task, this would skip to the next user and the next user can claim the task. So for this demo, I built a booking app, which it's powered by Conductor at the backend. Obviously, I didn't really care about the styles. The generated data here is just Faker, and the app is made with Next.js, right? So let's see how this was implemented using human tasks, right? So the search is a workflow, and this is how you would normally use Conductor. This is how I would imagine a cool use for Conductor itself, right? So when you search, I imagine you have different hotel providers, right? And you would hit a search, and this will hit this multiple providers, and I can actually see which, if say I had 6 providers and provider number 3 had an error every time people searched, I could actually see that there was an error in the 3rd provider, and I can do something about it, right? Because I can see it in the diagram. So basically, when you search, task here, region. A workflow is spawned, and I don't care about waiting for each of the services. Just as I get the data, I'm going to show the data on the search page, right? Now, for the human task in particular, this is other uses. I would say that it's not just an approval process, but you can actually leverage from the same benefit you have here. I did a checkout process, right? So if I book, this spawns a workflow that it's a checkout process, right? So let's get to that. So as you can see, the checkout process is spawned. I have the checkout ID. So if the user leaves the page or decides to resume the checkout, I'm still keeping the state of what the user intent was. And the same way I had here, I can see what the user, where the user is, and if he lives in a certain place, in a certain step. So you can see this is a chain of human tasks. Let's look at the definition. This is a chain of human tasks which make up a wizard in the checkout process, right? So here I have where I request the user for the personal information. I decided to use an external user. We support different type of users. This is external user, external group, conductor user, or conductor group. External user and external group is just a string. So you get to manage the way you manage your security in your application. But you have to know the user that the string for the external user to be able to claim the task. So in my example, I'm assuming you're a logged user, and I'm passing the user ID when the workflow is started. This way I know that he has to claim this specific task. Then the input parameters, I decided not to give default values. If I did, then in the form, I would see the default values. And I don't really have a trigger policy. So as the user moves through the checkout process, I'm James. The workflow, which we have here, the workflow moves. And I can see what the user inputted in the task. I can also choose to make a much complicated workflow that depends on other microservices or whatever, and the user from the site will not be able to know, right? You will just see whatever is the next step in the workflow. Here I'm validating on the client side. I'm just showing that this is possible. So I'm gonna fill in an address, my address on my city. And this will move the execution to the next step, right? So basically here I can see that the user is not from Uruguay. He went here and this is the file, this ends. I get the information back here. Let's do a different booking. See, the user decides to go back. So if the user decides to go back, I can clearly see the intent of the user. The user started this checkout process. He input this data, but he decided to go back. So from this, I can get valuable information about what the intent of the user was, and I can change the workflow. So now, continue. So here I chose Uruguay. He gets a different code, right? So he went to a different, he chose a different path. So here, if the user decides to go back, I can see it. So the execution is finished from the perspective of the user. But it didn't, right? Because it spawned a new workflow, which requires an approval. So for here, what I'm trying to show is that even though the user doesn't know what's going on, internally, we can spawn an internal process that requires an approval. And here it can be a process that it's just managed within Conductor. It doesn't have to be managed in this Next.js application. So here, the approval discount is assigned to me. I claim it, and I can approve it. Note that for every task, I can decide to complete the task, which will just put the task in a completed state. I can update, meaning if this was a form, I can just put information, update, and release, which means that the task will already have that data until it's claimed again and completed. And the process is finished. Regarding the way this was implemented on the Next.js app, it's pretty simple. It's similar to what Oliver was showing earlier. It's just calls to the SDK. You have the main page. The user searches. When the user searches, this spawns a workflow, just as in Oliver example. And when you handle a booking, you start another workflow, which is the checkout ID. Note that here I hard-coded the user ID, but this could have been the ID of a logged user. For the checkout page, I'm just finding the task and claiming for the user that was in the workflow, getting the template for that particular task, and rendering the task in this checkout form, which, as I said earlier, is just a JSON form schema. Given that this is React and this works for Angular, Vue, React, and probably I know that those are at least the frameworks that are supported. I can easily change whatever I want on the way the form is rendered. Here's where I validated. Here's where I decided to choose that the validation is on the front end. Anyway, basically, that's it. Any questions? Oh, there's a question.
So we're done so far, but I think I had personally some questions for you, but you just answered. A lot of front-end developers will ask, how do I style my component? And you clearly explain that because it's a JS form component. It's pretty standard. It can be used in any application, whatever the framework you're using, and it can be totally styled the way you want. The second thing is a little bit about when you demote the back button, that is actually going back to the task and do another iteration of the task. This is very important, especially when you're working in a regulated environment. Like it's pretty much impossible to code what the user usually is trying to do, going back and retry again. This is something that normally for a regulated company needs to be tracked and put in the compliance system. which is natively provided by Conductor in that case.
Yes, this is actually well supported on the SDK. This is just a call to the SDK. I'm going back to the first task that matches the type human. So you get to, again, you have a lot of flexibility as to the way you want to handle that go back.
Mm-hmm. We used to say that it is important to be quick and rapid developing applications. This is very important, but we have always to remember that the maintenance is the most costly in terms of time and money for an application life cycle. So by doing this, not only you have all the bells and whistles to create your application pretty quickly, but when your application is executing, you can introspect everything that is running underneath, right? As James showed pretty well, you can see one particular execution, and see what the user is trying to do. You can analyze it, I said, for compliance reasons, but it can be also just to improve the workflow itself. If you see that, for example, users are struggling between task 4 and task 5, takes too much time, you may decide to say this is a way to improve the way our application is working. Now we know by introspecting the execution that we have a problem here. It's no more just as a developer, we are developing the application, we put it on prod, it's no more our problem. And yeah, we're gonna act when there will be a bug that will be seen. But here it's also a good way to interact with product owners and tell them like, hey, look, in the execution of this part of the application, you ask us to implement this workflow, but you have to know that between this task and this task, there are some like things are not really efficient. So try to think and come up with an updated version of the workflow that can, maybe it's just can send a notification to the user to say, hey, you didn't finish your checkout. Do you want to, do you need help? Do you want to continue? Things like that. There are many ways that you can improve the workflow and make it more efficiently. But if you don't know what's happening, you have no means to implement those improvements. So it's pretty clear. I think with human task, it's pretty clear that it's very helpful and make a complete view of the way the application is working. Not just the data is coming from the user and the data is coming from the APIs.
Maybe you decide that, for example, the address should go first before the personal info, right? So you just save, and you immediately get this in the flow, right? So now if I check out, I get the address first.
Pretty amazing. All right. Thank you, James. Really appreciate this demo. I think everyone will be also happy. And of course, if there is any question now or later, feel free to contact us. You can contact us in many ways. If you're a member of our Slack channel, you can reach out to us there. If not, still our email, like devrel at orkes.io. Sorry, I'm looking at the questions at the same time. So we have two questions actually, James. One is, can we capture a file in human task? Meaning like uploading files? probably.
Like
I don't know if.
So for now, we only support the components that are there, but yes, I'm loading a file. Okay, so for now, the form builder supports the components that are there, but you can add your custom components by editing the code. And with regards to uploading a file, note that the whatever input you put in the form is part of the workflow itself. So if you upload a file, you should probably make it a small file because it's going to be in the workflow JSON response. Or you have to handle it in a different way, like a worker or some kind.